Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Extreme Community Football League, also known as the XCFL. I'm the XCFL Jets 360 Media Director, Daniel Greco. I'm also the host of Jets 360 podcast, and I will be here to give you all the Jets news. This is our first episode of the Jets 360 podcast. So we have a few features here that we're going to bring to light. First up is the Jets Wire. This is where we're going to talk about what's upcoming in the current podcast episode. And also in episode 1, we're going to get to talk about the new ownership with Ferreira Sr. taking over the XCFL Jets and also his new coaching staff that he's put in place. We'll talk about the Jets XCFL Season 16 schedule. We will game recap featuring the daddyleagues.com and the recapwizard.com. Please check out those two websites, daddyleagues.com and recapwizard.com, for all your Madden CFM franchise needs. I mentioned a little while ago the Jets Factor, which will be basically talking about the stats and who is the leaders of the Jets, who is making a factor for the Jets. And last but not least, to close up episode 1, we will talk what's next for the Jets. So let's jump right into it. Al Ferreira is the new owner of the XCFL Jets. He is currently the owner GM of this team, and he is a veteran to the league. He has been around a while. He knows how to get things done. Unfortunately, the win column, is not something he knows how to get done. But this season, being 5-4, no one expected those Jets to be there right now. We'll get into that in a little bit and talk about that. First order of business is Ferreira takes Todd Bowles off the sideline and moves him up to the front office as his assistant GM, and in their first move, they hire a head coach. Some thought it may have been Scott Frost. Some thought it may have been his son, possibly. But nope, it is Buck Conrad. For those of you that don't know who Buck Conrad is, he's a former XCFL quarterback for the XCFL Chargers in the Madden 18 cycle. Ferreira Sr. drafted him first overall pick in that cycle in the last season. Unfortunately, did not get much playing time due to some serious injuries involving concussions and such. So with that, Conrad took the safe route, and unfortunately, this young man had to retire. Ferreira Sr. was with him through that process and coached him along on his rehab and has given him another opportunity to be involved in the game that he loves. Unfortunately, not able to play, but will be a coach. Ferreira Sr. has mentioned that this guy has a football mind. He understands the game very well. He knows things that are coming next before they're coming. He is 2 to 3 steps ahead is basically what he's trying to say. And with that being said, they had to bring in also an offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator. So this is a full house rebuild starting at the top of the organization. And to do that, Ferreira Sr. brings in his cousin Sal Santangelo as the offensive coordinator and Mike Rico as the defensive coordinator. Now, these two gentlemen have played the game. They've also coached college ranks and high school ranks, but unfortunately they have no XCFL coaching experience or any professional, quote-unquote, experience in the coaching world. So Ferreira takes a gamble with the squad that he brings into the front office and on the sidelines. He is a trusting man, so I assume he has great confidence in these guys to get the job done. Otherwise, he wouldn't have put them in place. However, he's also known to give people an opportunity, and I think that's what he's trying to do here. So moving on to the Jets Season 16 XCFL schedule. And we're going to go ahead and talk about the first 6 weeks, which was week 1 against Detroit on the road in Detroit. And then the Jets played the Dolphins at home, traveled weeks 3 and 4 on the road to Cleveland and Jacksonville, and then back home weeks 5 and 6 versus the Broncos and the Colts. Weeks 7 through 12, the Jets will play against the Vikings in week 7, the Bears in week 8, the Dolphins again in week 9. And currently where we are right now with the Season 16 is Week 10, where the Jets will face off against the division rival Buffalo Bills tonight at 10 p.m., so go ahead and check that out. The Jets are 5-4, as I mentioned earlier, and the Bills are a 2-7 record thus far. Moving on with the schedule recap, you have Week 11 next week, which is the bye week for the Jets, and then they will stay home in Week 12 versus division rival the Patriots, which will be the first matchup against the Patriots this year. Moving through weeks 13 through 17, we have the Titans in week 13 and the Bills again in week 14. Moving on to the Houston Texans in week 15 and the Commissioner's Kids, the Packers of Green Bay in week 16 at home. Finishing on the road in New England week 17, that game could possibly have some division complications or also any playoff picture outcomes. So that is the Jets' schedule for this year. We're going to go right into the recap for Week 1, which featured the Jets versus the Lions. The Jets were victorious in this one in overtime with a 27-21 win. McCown, yes, was the starter by the end of this one. Unfortunately, Bridgewater was hurt. Also going down was Leonard Williams. Since then, Leonard Williams has been back on the field for the Jets. Not so much for Teddy Bridgewater. McCown in this one was 4 of 6 for 163 yards, 2 touchdowns, and no interceptions. On the ground, Bilal Powell had 8 carries for 30 yards and 1 touchdown. Pryor Sr. comes up big at the end of this one in the fourth quarter to catch a 75-yard wide-open bomb for a touchdown to tie this one up and bring it into overtime, where the Jets wound up winning 27-21. Defensively helping them in this one was Williamson with 8 tackles and 1 sack. Moving on to the next week, where the Dolphins were visiting the Jets at home in MetLife, and the Dolphins came to play in this one with a score of 27-14. Jets just couldn't get this one going. McCown was the starter since Bridgewater was injured and is still out on injury. He was 10 of 25 for 172 yards with 1 touchdown and 3 interceptions. Bilal Powell on the ground with 11 carries for 22 yards and a touchdown. Enunwa grabs 2 balls out of the air for 87 yards and a touchdown. And Williamson again on defense for 7 tackles and a sack. Next up, the Jets traveled to Cleveland to play the Browns. They won this one in overtime as well, 19-16. This was the battle of the rookie quarterbacks, where Mayfield was quite the talk of the town, possibly the quarterback of the Jets, but the Jets wound up getting Darnold to fall to them, and he starts in this one 15-23 for 210 yards and 0 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. Crowell carries the ball as he is the leading workhorse in this one at 17 rushes for 98 yards and a touchdown. Sterling grabs 5 balls for 85 yards and no touchdowns. And the right end Anderson that they picked up in the offseason had 3 tackles, and 2 of those were a sack. Next up, the Jets traveled down to Jacksonville to play the Jaguars, and they did not show up in this one. They must have traveled for a vacation, because this was 27-3. The Jets score a late field goal to avoid the shutout in this one. Darnold, 8 of 15, 82 yards, and no touchdowns and 1 interception, Crowell had 5 rushes for 7 yards and no touchdowns. Enunwa only had 3 catches for 29 yards and 0 touchdowns. Jamal Adams, the defensive standout, drafted a few years ago, had 5 tackles. As I mentioned, the Jets just simply did not show up in this one. They barely got over 100 yards, I think, of offense in this one, and Jacksonville Jaguars were just lights out. Next up, you had the Broncos come in to face the Jets at MetLife here. The Broncos lose this one to the Jets 21-13. Darnold goes 15 of 16, 180 yards and 3 touchdowns. He totally turns around that performance and looks great. Bilal Powell had 9 rushes for 27 yards. Nick Sterling had 5 receptions for 105 yards and a touchdown. And Tremaine Johnson had 3 tackles and an interception in this one. The Jets win this one 21-13. Next up, the Colts came in to play against the Jets, and Sam Darnold in this one was 10 of 15 for 165 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Isaiah Crowell rushed a rock 12 times for 62 yards and 0 TDs. Robbie Anderson gets 2 receptions for 55 yards and a touchdown, and Brooks on defense for 1 tackle and 2 interceptions. Next, the Jets hosted the Minnesota Vikings in this one, and the Jets get beaten up badly, 27-7. Again, another late score to avoid the shutout in this one. Sam Darnold, unfortunately, did not show up here. 8 of 16, about 50% on that. 130 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. Crowell only 4 carries for 10 yards, and Enunwa 2 receptions for 55 yards and a touchdown, and Williamson on defense finds himself 8 more tackles for the Jets. Next was the Chicago Bears in a defensive battle out in the Chi-Town where the Jets beat the Bears 6-0. This was a defensive battle, but yet still a sloppy, slow-paced game, and Darnold comes out of this one, the victor, with 9 of 17, 125 yards and 2 interceptions. Bilal Powell carries the ball 12 times for 26 yards. Robbie Anderson has 4 catches for 61 yards and 0 touchdowns. And Williamson, again on defense, shows out with 4 tackles and 1 interception. Next, the Dolphins hosted the Jets down in Miami, and the Jets were hoping for a different outcome in this one, as this was the battle for first in the AFC East. The Dolphins shut out the Jets 21-0. Jets cannot avoid the shutout as Sam Darnold goes 16 of 26 for 168 yards. He had no touchdowns and 3 interceptions. Bilal Powell carries the ball 8 times for 40 yards and 0 touchdowns. Enunwa grabs 4 receptions for 60 yards and 0 touchdowns. And once again, the standout on defense is Williamson with 4 tackles. And leaders. For the Jets right now on the passing department, you have Sam Darnold leading the way as he's played the most games. He is 81 of 128 for 1,060 yards and 6 touchdowns. Josh McCown behind him in the few games that he got to start earlier in the season. He's 14 of 31 and 335 yards, and he also has 3 touchdowns. Teddy Bridgewater in his opening night performance was 10 of 14 for 111 yards with 0 touchdowns. The Jets' backfield has been producing a dual running back threat, but mostly from Crowell. Crowell has 70 attempts on the ground for 255 yards. He's averaging 3.6, and he also has a touchdown. Bilal Powell, who has seen some time at fullback and halfback, has played 59 attempts for 187 yards. He's averaging 3.2 on the ground. He does lead the way with the Jets running backs with 2 touchdowns on the year. Josh McCown also has 2 completions for 9 attempts on the ground, and he is 4.5 average running the ball. Trenton Cannon, the rookie, has 1 attempt for 2 yards, and Sam Darnold has tried to run the ball 5 times and has gathered no yards on those attempts. Receiving-wise, Neil Sterling, I think I said Nick Sterling earlier, I correct myself. Neil Sterling is the leading receiver for the Jets as a tight end with 26 receptions with 393 yards. He's averaging just a little over 15 yards, and he has himself a touchdown this season so far. Quincy Enunwa has 21 receptions for 383 yards. He's averaging about 18.2, and he has 2 touchdowns himself. Jermaine Kearse, 26 receptions for 292 yards. He's 11.2 average and 1 touchdown so far this season. Robbie Anderson, who hasn't really gotten to see the ball a lot this season. I'm just not sure if the chemistry is there between Darnold and Anderson yet. As we know, Josh McCown and Teddy Bridgewater worked well with Anderson in the preseason leading up to the season, but now that Darnold has taken over, he seems to like his tight end targets, and of course Enunwa is just like another tight end, except he plays wide receiver. So Robbie Anderson has 13 receptions for 214 yards. He's averaging 16.5, but he does have 2 touchdowns. Terrell Pryor has 3 receptions for 93 yards. Of course, he had the 1 big play in Detroit in Week 1. Haven't heard much from him since then. He has 31-yard average due to the 3 receptions and also 1 touchdown. Defensively for the Jets, as you might see here, Avery Williams is my standout as he is the defensive tackle leader. Well, he is 1 shy of the leader, Michael Kendricks. Also rounding out this list is Jatavius Brown with 43 from the Chargers, Zach Brown with 40 from the Redskins, and Aaron Donald with 39 tackles with the Rams. And, of course, this is up until Week 10, including some games that have been played. Leading the way in tackles for the Jets is Avery Williamson, the linebacker, with 44 tackles and 2 sacks and an interception. He's having himself quite a year so far. Buster Screen falls second on this list with 28 tackles and 1 interception. Tremaine Johnson, the man out of Montana, with 22 tackles and 3 interceptions. Jamal Anderson has 21 tackles and 1 interception. And rounding out the top 5 defensively for the Jets is Darren Lee with 17 tackles. Let's go ahead and talk about what's next for the Jets, and that'll wrap up the episode 1 here of the podcast. Week 11 is the bye week for the Jets next week, so they're going to have to regroup. This game against Buffalo tonight is a big game. It's a game that they must win. If they could win this game, they could possibly be tied with the Dolphins for the division lead. But let's not fool ourselves, guys and fans. The Jets are 0-2 against the Dolphins right now, so they're really going to need the Dolphins to lose some games, and the Jets are going to have to take that division with a winning record. In Week 12, it'll be the first matchup against the division rival Patriots. This will be the first time these two meet this season. That game will be played at home. Then the Jets will travel on the road to face the Tennessee Titans and their new owner in the XCFL. Then we will face our Bills again, division rival, up in Buffalo in Week 14. In weeks 15 and 16 will be the final 2 Jets games at home against the Houston Texans. And also in week 16, we will host the Commissioner's Kids and the Packers. It's the Battle of the Larsons in week 15 and 16. And then rounding out the Jets schedule in week 17 will be against their division rival Patriots. This could possibly come down to the wire for the Jets on this game and possibly also for the Dolphins, so stay tuned for this one as they face off in Week 12 and Week 17. Well, I'm Daniel Greco. This is the JETS360 podcast. I hope you enjoyed our first episode. I hope you guys liked it. We'll be hoping to get more of these out to you as we get through the cycle. Once again, this is Daniel Greco, and I am